Hello everyone, this is Hero Mystic, and I am here to react to Pseychie's video on a overcomplicated gacha review of Girls Frontline. This one just came out literally an hour ago, and I am a big fan of Pseychie. I first heard about him from Nikkei. In fact, his channel first started off with Nikkei, and I learned a lot from him and his unit reviews. Since then, he has expanded his repertoire and he's played tons of more gacha games, and he's made reviews after playing them for a month or two. This one is going to be particularly interesting. Currently, his favorite game right now, I want to say, is still Nikkei, but he's pretty high on Heaven's Burning Red right now. We all know that Ghost Frontline is a very unique gacha game. In fact, a lot of people would say that it would be kind of wrong to call it a full-on gacha game unless we're talking about the skin system, because the gacha in of itself is pretty unique in that you don't really spend money on it, you just spend a lot of time. So a lot of people have asked me how to get into Girls Frontline 1 because they're interested after seeing my summaries, and it'll be pretty nice to see what Pseychie has to say about it, and I can just either add on to what he says or correct what he says. This should be a pretty long one though. I think it's over an hour, I want to say. I don't really know because I'm still in their premiere video, so I don't even know how long this is. This will be a pretty fun watch. Let's get started.
Girls Frontline has fallen victim in the transition to the new era gacha games. However, despite making virtually no revenue and being clowned on for being referred to as the cockroach of gacha games,
This is true.
its significance in the genre has been monumental, and has often redefined what mobile games can achieve. In the midst of all its outdated and janky design choices, I wanted to find out for myself. Is this game that's constantly living on its last legs really as significant or good as they say? Is it still new player friendly after years of updates? What about its monetization or levels of grind? My name is Pseychie, and welcome to a very special volume of my overcomplicated gacha review series. Believe me when I say it, despite looking like a mid-2010s Flash game, GFL was a behemoth to understand. It threw me in a loop with its complex mechanics and systems, and at certain points in my journey, I almost wanted to give up, because covering the game to this degree has made me question sanity a couple times.
Yeah, he's right. From my perspective, I first started playing Girls Frontline 1 in 2019, and it only took me until 2024 to actually sit down and play the game. So it's been about 5 years since I actually decided to get good at the game. So yeah, it is a pretty big sanity check with how complicated it is.
For reasons you will see later. While 1 month is the standard for the time I spend for these reviews, GFL is a whole different beast. There's a reason I tend to stay away from old era gacha games now. There are many years of content patches usually means there's a mountain of modes and mechanics to understand, outdated game designs that typically require more research and planning, and a long-time dedicated fanbase that will scrutinize the most minute detail you get wrong. That being said, I'm very fascinated by the GFL universe, and I'm willing to give it special treatment. This volume of my long-form gacha reviews easily took the longest for a single game dedicated to the series itself. Not only did I have to sift through guides published over the past 5 years to check which ones are still relevant,
I did the same. There's a lot of guides out there, and a lot of them are outdated because they're on GamePress, and GamePress shut down a while ago. So the community had to transfer their guides over to a Google Doc.
I had to quickly adapt to all the features added during the game's runtime to make a review as timely as I could. Spanning across over 2 months of playtime and days I haven't had to grind this hard since 3-turn farming in FGO, I'm ready to talk about this absolute monster of a franchise. Get comfortable and strap in for the ride. Girls Frontline is a franchise started by the renowned Mika team, who is now a much bigger company than what was before. Just like the history of MiHoYo, I also found their story to be pretty interesting. So much so that I wanted to dedicate a section to it. There's a comprehensive 30-page document detailing the entire drama surrounding the formation of Mika team, as it's not the prettiest conflict I've read. I'll be going over just the important bits for the sake of brevity. Mika was formed by just 2 college buddies that shared interests in otaku works. Yao Meng, who felt more suited for the managerial aspects of the collaboration, while Yu Zhong was responsible for actual game development.
No one calls him Yu Zhong, they call him Yu Zhong, or Ferrari, one of those two.
After a successful debut with an indie project in 2013 called Bakery Girl, the duo went into full swing into developing GFL. YM represented the company Array Networks for distributing the game, including marketing and attracting investors, while YZ represented Sunborn and Mika team as part of game development. In 2015, the game went into beta testing with highly positive ratings. Now, the period leading up to the release was riddled with conflict and drama. YZ had the impression that friendship and cooperation were the most important aspects of the development cycle. As long as they had passion, anything was possible. Meanwhile, YM felt that his college buddy was living in a fantasy world. When the beta version of the game had server issues, YZ blamed Array Network for not looking into it, as he had the presumption that they were responsible for the distribution of the game. However, Array felt that this aspect would still fall under game development, and it was still Mika that needed to solve it, and they were trying to shift their poor game dev skills onto them. Quarrels like this became all but common as time went on, with the two drifting further apart as bitter rivals, as issues relating to distribution rights and lack of industry experience propped up both sides. Eventually, Mika decided that Array could no longer be trusted. Both sides fought over the rights to GFL, with Mika eventually coming out on top as the winner in the dispute. But not before YM had dissolved Array Networks and plunged the trademark name into legal limbo, meaning that Mika still had restrictions to use the Girls Frontline name. This is also the reason why the JP version of the game is called Dolls Frontline. YM would eventually go to form a brand new company, and it's one that you might have heard of before: Yostar.
I didn't know that. Damn. Okay. Yeah, Yostar doesn't have a great reputation right now. So that's very funny.
I actually found a handy chart explaining the fallout of the whole debacle, and there's a couple more interesting details. An artist going by the alias Hai Mao, or better known as Lowlight, worked as an artist for GFL that left due to creative differences. He would eventually found his own company, Hypergriff, who is the developer for Arknights. Yostar would eventually become one of the most influential publishers in mobile gaming, gaining publishing rights over massive titles such as Azur Lane and Blue Archive, not to mention the aforementioned Arknights. From this history, you can clearly see how the original college duo would both achieve their dreams and become major players in their respective fields, just maybe not in the way they anticipated. In the words of this article's ending, it's an account of how a pair of plucky young friends wanted to conquer the world, but ended up being conquered by it in return. Now we can talk about the game itself. The mid-2010s was a hugely experimental time for mobile gaming. If you were able to capitalize on this period, you could have made it out big. The experimental aspects also pertain to game development, specifically gacha games. For example, back in the days, the main gacha mechanics centered around premium currency were typically only used for equipment or cosmetics, not pulling actual characters. GFL caught the tail end of that era, and it also opted into a similar system. Only problem here, once gacha games switched over to monetizing with characters, it was impossible for Mika to make the switch too.
I'm trying to think about that, because I first got into gacha games with Fire Emblem Heroes, and that was in 2018. And Ghost Frontline came out in 2018. So I was a year behind Ghost Frontline. So I guess that is true. I can only go by what he says, because I haven't played gacha games before 2018.
So the cosmetic gacha just kinda got grandfathered in. Once we get to the gameplay portion, you'll see just how, because this game had the mindset of an older era design perspective, some of its mechanics, no matter how much it's revamped, just couldn't be updated to meet modern standards. GFL first launched in May 2016 for CN, 2 years later for Global. This period in time was a wild west for mobile games. Most of my audience is around 20 to 30 years old, so you might recall that this was an actual ad for the game in 2018.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so, that's great for its time. But nowadays, it's a little. I think the best word for this is a little cringe, but it's still funny as shit.
Unfortunately, Agent 47 is not included. Due to its now outdated monetization system, the game doesn't perform well financially. It didn't help that registration rights for the game expired in China, and the game was put on a halt, with them announcing that it will return as a legacy version on PC sometime this year. It's uncertain what this version will include, but seeing that GFL 2 relies on the lore of the first game quite a lot, I imagine there will be ways to view all the story so far. I don't know how long it will be before the global servers follow suit, but this change should be happening to all the servers at some point regardless. Getting started with the game in 2025 is going.
I think that may actually be contentious, primarily because Yuzong really wants to keep the servers up, even if he has to use his own money. In fact, if it wasn't for Dark Winter not wanting to just renew the servers for China, those would still be up as well. In fact, Project Neuro Cloud has his story complete in China for like half a year now, yet the servers are still in maintenance mode. And we just got the story done in global as well. So we should be starting to go into the same mode of us being in maintenance mode. And the servers are still up. And it's just doing reruns at this point. So it may just be what Final Fantasy XI is trying to do, where they're trying to make the cost so low that they can keep the servers up indefinitely, and it won't hurt their bottom line too much.
Going to prove a challenge for any newcomer. I imagine with the exploding popularity of Exilium, there will be some fans curious enough to wander into the first game.
Yes, I can tell you that for sure, they are.
Please know that this review is not a guide or tutorial to help you get started. As a content creator, I have a limited budget on time. I often do have to wait for special events to get the best head start, or play in a way that maximizes efficiency while skipping some of the finer details. It became clear that with some of the feedback on my previous reviews, this mindset of playing a game for 1 month, then reviewing it just isn't cutting it anymore. I needed to be more goal-oriented when tackling GFL. The first order of business is to ask the community to what extent do I need to play in order for my opinions to be considered valid.
That is a very contentious topic. I really think time is the best meter for this, because it doesn't matter how good a gacha game is. If it takes too long to get to the good part, then the game failed as a whole. You can't ask everyone to reach a certain point to judge a game. Every opinion is valid, even if you only played it for like the first 5 minutes, in my opinion. Now, considering he wants to do a full comprehensive review, there is Ghost Frontline is just very hard to review with this full depth in mind. You're in here for the long haul. Now, he said he took 3 months, and I think 3 months is pretty good, if not too long, to be honest. But going in and asking the community for how long or how much do you have to delve into in order to make a proper review, I don't know.
Here are some of the major takeaways. I need to at least unlock every mode there is. This meant that the latest gameplay feature to reach is unlocking a personal tank unit upon reaching chapter 12 of the main story.
The tank doesn't really do anything though. I mean, there is a mode where you're specifically supposed to use the tank for, but that's just often its own thing. When it comes to the actual gameplay where you're going through the story and doing events, you basically never use the tank. So that's a pretty weird criteria.
That's how it is, then I will play until chapter 12. GFL also has the gacha curse of the story only picking up quite a while away from the beginning. I'm glad to announce that I've completed up to chapter 11 of the main story, while also completing up to the polarized light of the event campaigns. Being thrusted into an older era gacha also presented challenges from a gameplay and progression perspective. I couldn't rely on the knowledge and expectations of playing modern gachas, and the only other old school gacha I've played extensively is FGO. I suddenly needed to learn which dolls were good enough to be used for beginners from the game's 6-year-old roster. how to build starter teams, and how to progress the account while conserving resources in the most efficient methods. This means that even if I got a unit that served a good niche, I often had to scrap them in order to squeeze out every bit of resources to progress faster.
You didn't need to scrap 5 stars that quickly. Now, if they're just outright bad, yes, there's a lot of bad dolls, don't get me wrong. But the niche ones you're supposed to keep for their niches, obviously. Now, for me personally, I pretty much have everything covered except for ranking maps. Ranking maps do require some specific things to get high scores, which usually requires like machine guns or shotguns, but they're so expensive to get. But for me, I have an M4 team, basically call it M4 Exodia, and I have the Scar team. And the Scar team itself can destroy everything in the game. You can more or less scrap everything you want to, just because I have those 2 teams. But if you want to be like very efficient and have different teams lined up to rank highly for ranking maps, then you are going to need those niches. Then again, he was only going to play for this review only and probably wasn't going to stick around. So I could see him scrapping everything.
All the while playing whack-a-mole, finding and verifying which guides and online resources are still relevant. Because good luck finding updated tutorials on the first GFL in 2025.
I mean, just go to the Discord. They show them all the time. It's pretty weird. He is in the Discord, right?
Hey, this is your Mystic from the future here. I was just editing this video and I looked at the screen this time. At first, I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't too sure what I was looking at. But now that I am, I really have no idea what guide he's looking at right now. That's not any guide I ever had given to me on the Discord. So I'm pretty sure he's looking at a very outdated guide. So I won't be throwing any shit at Pseychie or anything like that. But I just want to reaffirm that everyone who wants to learn about Ghost Frontline should either look up a video on YouTube. There is one from Iango, and he made that in 2023 and is still valid here for the most part. And there is also the Ghost Frontline Discord, the official Discord that posts guides basically every day whenever someone asks them. There's like 4 guides that they usually throw out. So please check out those ones. I will link them in the description just so everyone knows where to go.
The lore of the Girls Frontline universe has been expanded in many ways at this point, with its story tied to Neural Cloud, a separate gacha game, which is supposedly a prequel, the sequel,
A prequel? No, it's not. It's a cycle.
Exilium, and soon Project Nat that's also releasing in the future. There was even a manga and anime series. Don't watch the anime. But since this game started at all, what's the story about anyways? In a distant war-torn future in a fictional Eastern Europe, great strides have been made in creating weaponized android waifus referred to as tactical dolls, or shortened as T-dolls. One of the manufacturers, called Sangvis Fairy Industries, had a major incident where a sentient AI corrupted the biometrics of its dolls to redirect its goals to destroy humanity. You are a freshly recruited commander contracted by Griffin and Kruger, a private military company. Backed by powerful sponsors, you are tasked with eradicating Sangvis forces from a particular zone. This is the cornerstone for the premise of the game when you start. You're accompanied by the anti-rain team consisting of M4A1, AR-15, SOAP Mod, M16A1, and RL-635. While it seems like a simple premise at first, the plot will start to become more advanced as you progress to the event campaigns later on. The commander's avatar literally just has a coat and a gas mask for a face by default. While they are depicted as female in the anime, there's actually no confirmed canon gender for them. The game lets your imagination run wild, and this is even extended to Exilium where you pick from a male or female commander. Also, your name is actually unique, so nobody else can name their commander Pseychie but me. You're more...
Okay, so all that is true. I know like a couple of people gave me shit for saying that the commander's gender is ambiguous, but it is true. The commander's gender is ambiguous. Just because they made them female in the manga and anime, it doesn't mean that they were confirmed female in the game.
More or less just a self-insert, but the commander does have agency in the story and starts speaking later on. As expected, the first couple chapters are just kinda there for setup and introducing some game mechanics. It's not until later in which the lore starts to take hold. The first 6 or so chapters were written by a co-creator of Arknights, which probably explains why it's not very good. You do meet some pretty influential
Yeah, the first 6 chapters are kind of shit. It's not until chapter 7 where things start to really take hold, and chapter 8 is when it starts throwing in. Was it chapter 8? It's chapter 8 and 9 is when it starts throwing in the lore, like especially hard at you, and then 10 is when it takes off.
Figures later on, like Squad 404, consisting of the UMP sisters, 416, and G11, the Defy Task Force led by Angelina, and even Kruger himself. Yes, this means that GFL also falls into the age-old gacha curse of the story only picking up after you slog through some not-so-good portions. Now, given that progression is tied to story, and that the writing is what GFL is most known for, I wanted to play up until when the story starts to hit its peak. While I don't like to judge writing from an objective standpoint, there is some comments I like to make.
Okay, so he said he wants to judge it based on its peak. So I'm assuming a lot of the community that he talked to said that polarizing light is the peak. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I will say a polarizing light is basically like at least a 9 out of 10 story.
The story only really picks up at the 10.5 Singularity chapter and onwards. The bits leading up to it were better, but I certainly wouldn't say it was mind-blowing. Now, these campaigns were main events that were added permanently to the catalog. While you can start them at any time, it's still recommended that you go through the entire story in order. While the Continuum Turbulence chapter was also very enjoyable, what surprised me the most was the Isomer event. Following a peacekeeping operation that's seen by the commander, NJ of Squad Defy, and a few other dolls, the story is now told through the perspective of 3 different protagonists, with certain moments interweaving into each other as the plot unfolds. I can only describe the writing as a masterful blend of mystery and intrigue. With details so visceral and surreal, this chapter was an absolute joy to finish. Doing a story of this scale is not easy, especially when dealing with a complex timeline and factions with their own ideologies. Reading through Isomer almost made me relate to when I was going through FGO's Avalon Lefay chapter. You're not the hero of this play, you're just a pawn on the chessboard. The central conflict feels so distant and oppressive that it's not something you can solve alone. I feel if some of the modern gacha game stories like Genshin and Withering Waves have this mindset that they need to throw complicated lore or details at the player, thinking that it will make a story better. While I do think a good story should be complex, there has to be a level of intrigue in the moment-to-moment writing that makes the player seek out additional lore that may help them understand the plot better. For example, the Singularity chapter kicks off with a major storyline of the military betraying Griffin and ousting them as a terrorist group. Kruger has been arrested, and in the midst of all that, you have to find out what's actually happening and how to get out of the situation. Suddenly, characters are mentioning some names and events that I didn't know about, but I feel like I would like to know to understand what's going on. What's the 16 Lab organization? What's OGAS? What's the Butterfly incident? All these terms led me down to massive rabbit holes that I feel would spoil the entire lore of the GFL universe. What's even more interesting, certain levels actually present different victory conditions that will branch off the storyline. To be honest, this doesn't matter at all. Just imagine this as any other dialogue choice in a gacha game. There is a single direction that the story can go, and most you might get another level or generic ending. It creates an illusion of choice, and I do appreciate the effort, but let's be real here. Having actual meaningful branching storylines in a live service game is just not gonna happen. On the other hand, one of the things that surprised me the most, and something GFL does that most other gachas don't, is interweaving the story into its actual level design. Here's how it works. I would describe GFL.
Let me stop right here just so I can comment on what he just said, particularly that he was really surprised, and it sounded like that the Isomer is his favorite. He might change that later on, but he really blazed up the Isomer event, and I actually agree. The Isomer event is really, really good. It's pretty surprising because no one actually talks about the Isomer event, but it really shows just how much consistency that the Ghost Frontline storyline can have. I think the big reason why they stopped doing that or at least not as good at least, is because of how much time it takes to go through just one event. It makes their story really slow if they put in so much detail for just one battle, because that's really all it was. It was one single battle. The Isomer event is unique in that way, and everything else became much more loose just so that they can get through the story quicker. But I do agree, the Isomer event is really, really good.
GFL's gameplay as two different flavors.
Let me go back a little bit.
Gachas don't, is interweaving the story into its actual level design. Here's how it works. I would describe GFL's gameplay as two different flavors blended into one mix: a real-time strategy combat portion and a turn-based tabletop portion. You will assemble an echelon consisting of up to 5 dolls. The formation of the team is configured on a 3x3 grid with the tiles numbered 1 to 9 like on a keyboard. Each doll occupies one tile and each has their own tile buffs, where depending on their positioning, they will buff another doll in its effective range. This is often integrated into how the different classes are supposed to function. As you know, the dolls in the game are named after actual guns in real life. They're split into handgun, assault rifle, machine gun, SMG, rifle, and shotgun. Certain classes like handgun, shotgun, and SMGs are usually meant for tanking and supporting, while the remaining 3 for dealing damage. You'll find that SMG tile buffs tend to buff ARs, shotguns buff machine guns, and so on. Since you're always placed on the left side of the battlefield and the enemy is coming from the right, this means that whoever is placed on the frontmost column will take the brunt of enemy fire. Given how the targeting system works in the game, most formations will lean towards the left 2 columns so they get a bigger window to fire first. The game will introduce many battle formations to you, like the F formation, where your 5 dolls form the letter F on the field, or B formation, and so on. The outlier here is shotguns, where their tile buffs require them to be placed on the rightmost column. Now, building up these teams was a pain, especially since I had limited time to play. I prepared some teams that will allow me to go deeper into the game, but I didn't build a machine gun shotgun team until much later.
You don't need a machine gun shotgun team at all. You don't need them at all. Not even a little bit.
As these have somewhat of a different playstyle, for reasons I'll get into in a future section. Each doll has an active skill that can be auto-used, and you're free to switch their positioning mid-battle or even withdraw if the situation calls for it. In fact, this actually becomes a strategy where you deploy a dummy echelon, then withdraw everyone immediately to draw away powerful enemies. Because Mika thinks that having supply line missions where heavies are constantly pouring in and 2 tanks roaming the map is supposed to be fun. There's many small gameplay niches you can do, like resetting a doll's targeting priority or kiting enemies to make them fire later than usual. This may seem like a typical auto-battler gameplay loop, but all these small quirks can change the outcome and performance of the battle if done correctly. When a level starts, you can deploy echelons on the commanding post or allied helipads. There's a variety of level types where your objective is to capture the enemy command post, escort dolls to be evacuated on an allied helipad, or establish a supply line for a number of turns. You can move friendly echelons to one node adjacent to their current position, and doing so will use up a move. Your total amount of moves depend on the amount of deployed echelons and number of allied helipads. A node is captured when you end the turn with the echelon on top of it. If all adjacent nodes are captured by a faction, the node that is surrounded will automatically be captured on the next turn. This means if you make a single team run straight into enemy territory, you will never be able to capture any node because it's just immediately recaptured by the enemy. If a friendly echelon moves to a node with an enemy on top of it, then you will engage in combat with that enemy group. Echelons must also be supplied with ammo and rations. They will run out.
Okay, I'm gonna pause here because I was waiting for him to talk about the command post, just to clarify, but he didn't. So he might clarify a bit later, but I'm just gonna say it now. You can capture a command post whenever. So even if it's surrounded by red nodes, as long as you're on top of it and you end your turn, you end the map that way because you already captured the node regardless. So there is a caveat to that.
Out eventually and will need to be resupplied at a friendly helipad. If you try to go into battle, they'll either just freeze there and become a
Hey, look, he's corpse dragging.
sitting duck, or just withdraw immediately. You can fail a battle and continue, but if your command post is captured or don't have any allied echelons left, you fail the mission. Worth mentioning that the encirclement mechanic can actually lead to some pretty clever plays, such as when there's a scary boss sitting on the enemy command post. If you capture all adjacent nodes, you can just win without needing to fight it. When it's the enemy's turn, all their echelons on the field can move, but only one node per turn. All allies are healed slightly at the start of every turn, but you can also instantly repair them at an allied helipad.
They used to not do this. They used to not be able to repair itself at every turn. That was just something that was added kind of recently, actually, like within the last 2 years, I want to say.
You can also deploy a front echelon to help you out. They don't use up your moves, but you also can't control them directly. Their goals can be set to stand by, eliminate enemies, or capture the enemy HQ. They will make their play when you end the turn, but can only move one node per turn. The way these missions are designed and how the battlefield is laid out is actually kinda genius. It's usually interwoven into whatever is happening in the story right now. Here's a level from the Singularity story arc, where two groups rendezvous to defeat an enemy boss down the middle lane. Playing one version of it in the story will have the allied troops come in from the south side, while you control the squads from the north. But playing the diverging story beats, the second version has you playing from the south side's perspective. This is a far cry from certain gacha games like Nikke that just randomly throws in an enemy encounter after a completely unrelated story cutscene. Now, you can breeze through most of the early chapters with ease, and it probably don't even need more than one team to tackle them, as their overpowered front supports can take care of everything. But that will soon change. For a new player, it's in your best interest to push the main campaign as far as you can, as you get access to more logistics missions, which is basically the game's dispatch system. The later you go, the higher value ones you unlock. Yes, this means you will have an easier time progressing if you have a small group of late game players supporting you. You will have to either hope that your randomly sent friend requests get accepted, or go into a recruitment discussion forum online. But not so fast, as not everything is going to be a smooth journey. Here's where certain design choices will differ from modern gacha games, and
I'm waiting for the complaints here, and this may be where he's about to talk about them. I'm ready.
Why it could be harder for a newer player to approach it. Everything you do in this game has weight. If you use up any resource, the game will take it from you regardless if you win or lose. You don't get it back if you restart a stage. To make matters worse, if you restart or terminate a mission, any echelons still on the field will deplete their entire stock of ration and ammo, and must be resupplied before trying again. The only way you can avoid this is by retreating them on an allied helipad before restarting. In most modern gacha games, the stamina is refunded back to you if you fail or quit a level. Not here though. If a doll runs out of health, they become damaged and need to be repaired. This can be done if you go to an allied helipad and use up a quick repair contract. Alternatively, in a separate menu tab, you can repair them there, but it will cost resources and time. Unfortunately, you can't just sit around and wait for them to heal themselves. They're just idling in the medbay until you spend the resources to repair.
And look at that timer. That timer is 7 hours. That's ridiculous, even for back then.
Repair them. This is also another outdated game feature that newer games just don't do anymore. While they do give out a lot of instant repairs, the fact that this mechanic is in the game at all is a nuisance to new players, especially those that are used to playing the new era gacha games.
Now, I won't say it's a nuisance for new players because they pretty much made it obsolete by giving us so many quick repairs. Like, I started playing the game again after in 2024. And I had maybe 900 quick repairs, and I haven't ran out at all, honestly. It's pretty much a non-factor in this case. Now, to his credit, he says the fact that is there at all is bad, which I agree with, but it's not really regarding new players. I think it's just been bad even back then.
As a silver lining, one of the features of this repair mechanic is that each doll has a damaged sprite whenever they're knocked out of commission in combat. This even extends to all of the skins as well. This feature is completely removed in Exilium, since I feel some players may have appreciated it if the game stayed true to its traditions. You also have a limit of deploying 20 friend echelons per day. When one is deployed, that friend goes into cooldown for 2 hours. Again, the game does not care if you win or lose. Even if you need to restart or fail the stage, the daily use is still used up and the front echelon still goes into cooldown. All these mechanics can punish a new player for trying to get experimental and only encourages them to follow pre-existing guides. If you look up tutorials and plan properly, then you can just ignore all this bullshit, saving you time and resources, which to a beginner are very valuable commodities. Once an echelon is occupied with anything, you cannot use them for anything else. If a doll is sent on a logistics mission, for example, you can't level them, you can't train their skills, you can't even change their equipment around. You have to wait until they're done whatever they're doing or forfeit the activity. Given that GFL is an older gacha, it also has certain rules that don't apply to newer releases. Here are a few. Typically in gacha games, you're not allowed to run the same character in a team. While duplicate dolls can't be placed in the same echelon, you can actually use two of them if they're separated. You can also dismantle the dolls for resources. For whatever reason, these games even let you destroy 4 or 5 stars too. Be sure to lock the units you want to safeguard, because this game doesn't give you the safety rails the way newer gachas do.
Yes, they do. That's a little weird to say. So it's a bit more nuanced than that. If you ever get a new T-doll at all, it'll lock it in place. As for any duplicates, they'll be up for grabs where you can dismantle them. Now, the reason why you actually get rid of 3, 4, and 5 stars is to get cores. And cores are used to basically upgrade your T-dolls and add on dummy links and stuff like that. So he's probably oversimplifying again, but I feel like I should clarify that because that's a pretty big mistake.
Although, the game will give you many warnings if you select a high-level unit, and it's actually possible to spend cores to recover a doll just in case your stupidity or carelessness got the better of you. This function is extremely well hidden in the index menu, and I didn't even know this was a thing until 2 months later. That being said, if you're able to abuse front support early on, you'll make it past the first 10 chapters no problem. But after that, things are gonna heat up a little bit. This is where I ran into the first major roadblock. While the majority of the missions were about capturing the enemy base, and a few where you have to establish a supply line, Chapter 11's level designs became increasingly complex. The AI support echelons would just run straight into a kamikaze enemy and die. I don't know what happened between Chapter 10 and 11, but I can tell this change in level structure shows me that this was a turning point in game design. This also meant that I couldn't rely on my low IQ friends. Then, after consulting some online sources, I knew that by this point, having more than one echelon was no longer a suggestion. It had to be done in order to progress. Every single mission from now on demanded slightly different requirements and strategy. It was also then that I was introduced to a lot of the game's systems, or rather, I was forced to adapt to them. There was a 54-page document I was led to detailing the concepts of the game to beginners. Because if you want to find success in GFL, you're gonna have to learn the ropes. Heavy Ordnance Corp, aka HOCs, also sometimes known as fire support teams, will assist with battles as long as a friendly echelon starts one while within their range. HOCs can give artillery or anti-tank explosives to deal with beefier enemies. Yes, there's a hidden armor penetration value in the game too, with certain weapon types such as rifles being able to penetrate it at the cost of a lower rate of fire, or assault rifles handling crowds well, but will deal reduced damage to armored enemies if they don't have AP rounds equipped. HOCs don't have health, but they're knocked out of commission if an enemy comes in contact with their node. They can also be moved and must also be supplied regularly. Coalition units answer the question, if evil, why hot? In the separate mode called Capture Operation, you can send out troops to capture an enemy and pacify them to join your side. Every operation round lasts for about a month, and there's 100 enemies in the pool. The jackpot here being the Sangvis Ferry ringleader. Coalition units take different upgrade currencies and function a little differently than doll echelons. You can set the command to either defend, rush, or destroy. Why do they get all these cool skill cutscenes while the dolls don't? I don't know.
I don't either,
Coalition
actually.
echelons have a total cost, where the value of the unit determines the cost, and you obviously can't exceed it. They can also be dummy linked. Well, you can't get more copies of some of them, but it will still make them stronger. However, you have to use other copies of the same unit, so no using cores. They also can't equip gear, and have their own separate passive buffs that can be developed from the base. I overall found raising a coalition echelon just to try it out was a bit of a pain, and you have to deal with the capture operation mode. I honestly found them to be pretty interesting, but I feel like actual doll echelons just have more potential.
They do. They 100% do. The big thing about the coalition gacha, which is, yeah, it's basically gacha. People have been asking for SF units for a while, and but they implemented it in like the worst way possible. There is very few people that actually enjoy how the gacha is for the coalition units. They pretty much were just hoping for like Project Neuro Cloud's gacha system, if I remember correctly, but we just didn't get that. It is definitely a pain in the ass to get an SF unit, and it takes way too long.
Fairies are the assistants that help out with each echelon. They also need to be leveled and crafted in order for them to participate in battle. They give passive stat buffs, and you can use fairy command points to activate their skills for the next battle. Some of these are actually pretty cool, like being able to instantly deploy to another helipad while giving a debuff to the echelon, or deploying a taunt dummy to draw away enemy fire. When getting to the later chapters, you have to learn to be very strategic with your plays, as one wrong move can fail the mission. The game punishes you for being unprepared, since if you take a long time to beat the mission, your resources will get dwindled down in a war of attrition. Considering beginners don't have a stockpile of these saved up, it's gonna be costly if you wander around aimlessly. Your performance is also graded with 3 medals, a bronze for simply clearing it, a silver for occupying all nodes on the map, and a gold for clearing within a certain amount of turns and also defeating a certain amount of enemies. Given that the game has been live for more...
Okay, so that's not set in stone. So there are some maps that actually change their objectives for silver and gold. It really depends on what the objective is, because there are some maps where you actually have to just survive for a number of turns. So they don't really have like a occupy all nodes objective, because you're not supposed to be roaming around the map. You're supposed to just survive. So in those cases, it can be like you get a silver for killing 4 enemies, or you get a gold for not killing any enemies. You just run around and stuff. So it can vary from time to time.
More than 6 years, there's quite a bit of content. Each chapter also features a harder storyline called Emergency, and these do actually have a separate story to follow. The last difficulty modifier is called Night Battles, and this also presented a different set of challenges that I had to conquer. Night Battle is basically the hard mode for the game, but it's done in a way that's pretty interesting. Basically, the main story Night Battles just has you clear the entire map of enemies as the objective, and the level either ends in a clear or fail, so no letter grades to achieve, but you must clear it within a number of turns. Now, Night Battles have certain conditions that will make it more difficult. For one, all units suffer a major accuracy penalty. The main way to offset that is by equipping night vision goggles or other certain scopes. Second, you can only see one node adjacent to any echelon at a time, so you can't actually see where the enemies are across the map. You don't even get this visibility if you don't have a handgun doll in the formation, so having one per echelon is a soft requirement. Capturing radar nodes will reveal 2 nodes adjacent to it as long as it remains captured, and you can only deploy new echelons when you have visibility of the helipad. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Not all the doll types can equip night vision goggles, so does that mean that some of them will just have to deal with poor accuracy? Well, armored enemies in the game can't actually evade attacks, but as stated before, only those with high penetration can deal full damage. This is where rifle teams come in. While they can't get night vision, they can punch right through that armor. This means that these teams should get assigned to handling armored enemies, but will struggle against swarms. Now, understanding the gameplay mechanics was one thing, but when it comes to progression, I soon realized that my journey had just begun. Dolls can be leveled to 100 either via...
Okay, so the thing about rifle dolls is that even though they get accuracy penalties, they are so accurate anyways that they don't give a shit. So even against like evasive ones, they're still pretty accurate. So That's why rifles tend to be favored overall, because if you really want to, you can use machine gun and shotguns during night battles as well. But that's really not worth it. That's really not. You can just use a rifle team.
Just letting them win encounters or manually via combat reports. Typically, only 90 is enough for serious content, as dolls unlock certain upgrades upon reaching a level, and 90 is the last one on the list. You can enhance their stats to a higher degree via enhancement cubes or other fodder dolls, equip more gear slots, and unlock a vitally important aspect of the game called dummy linking. This refers to creating another copy of a doll to use in combat, creating up to 4 additional copies, basically quintupling your stats. You can kind of think of this as limit breaks, but you're able to also use cores to dummy link as well, with the higher rarities costing more. It's kind of like when the doll's consciousness is shared by multiple copies of them, making them do things all coordinated together. You can see how the game fully embraces the dolls as androids to be utilized in battle. If a doll is fodder or is not what you're looking for, at least their disassembled parts may be of some use to you. Dummy linking is complete.
I just saw him delete for me, and I'm like, that wasn't your... That's the second one, right? That you had one Swami, right? I just saw him dismantle that. I'm like, I really hope you already have one built up.
Completely taken out in Exilium, as the creators wanted a more humanistic portrayal of the dolls, even replacing their OG names with those sounding more natural. However, if you ask me, I actually think this makes GFL 1 have a more unique identity when it comes to these games with militaristic android waifus. When the game was conceptualized, the commander didn't have a voice or even talk in cutscenes. You were free to interpret this world whether you saw these androids as humans or disposable machines, rather than the one-sided lawful good protagonists in a lot of these tropes. You can get the combat reports to level up your dolls through a multitude of methods. But one of the most infamous farming techniques I had to learn was something called corpse dragging. This involves having a tank and a DPS while having 3 other dolls acting as the corpse to be leveled. Find a suitable level that I farmed a few times, and you'll basically have to starve everyone of resources except for the DPS, then just keep supplying only the DPS while clearing enemy encounters over and over while your tank soaks up all the damage like a brick wall. This saves on resources and allows you to level up the dolls in the process. It's kinda tedious, but with the planning mode feature, you can just autoplay everything in one go. I mean, I've had a grind in gacha games before, and I don't think anything will be as bad as 3-turn farming in FGO. Yes, I realize I used a less than optimal route and formation after 200 runs. Please stop bothering me. Dummy link.
No, I want to bother you because you're using 0-2 and using M16. I want to bother you on that. You don't need M16 anymore. You can just use your free SPAS 12, and that's totally fine. And the better map to use is at the end, chapter 13. So I believe he couldn't get to chapter 13 though, so that's totally fine. But the fact that he got over 600 runs in 3 months is like, bro, I think he overdid it, man.
King requires either additional copies of the same doll or course, which you can get naturally from weekly missions or dismantling dolls that are 3 stars or above. You can also enhance their stats with either fodder dolls or its own respective currency. The doll's skill can also be leveled to 10, and this uses its own data chip modules. Unless you use a quick complete contract, each leveling process also takes time for whatever reason. Another sign of outdated design, I guess. There's a total of 4 resource types: manpower, ammo, rations, and parts. Literally almost every action in the game uses these. Enhancing or calibrating weapons, it uses them. Deploying and supplying echelons mid-combat, you better have a lot of them saved up. Crafting dolls, equipment, or fairies, it'll use them too. These are naturally generated over time at a very slow pace, or you can either complete dailies and logistics missions for more. Dispatching an echelon will force them to be unavailable for the duration. So this sort of becomes a micromanagement cycle where you have to see which one of the resources you need the most. Instead of the
Whoa.
management cycle where you have to see which one.
Is that yours? Is that your account? You have over 100,000? I mean, you can get this much, but I am surprised you got this high if you're constantly playing for 3 months as a new player. That is a lot.
One of the resources you need the most. Instead of the traditional stamina system you see in modern gacha games, you can technically keep playing the game and make more upgrades as long as you still have resources. Now, one of the main ways resources are used is in doll construction. That's right, you don't pull them from a gacha. You have to deal with the construction system instead. Since this system doesn't directly require money, there's no pity or rate up. No shelling out your wallet for any shortcuts here. If the doll is dropped from a map, then you have to keep grinding it over and over again until it drops. Constructing a doll uses up a contract, and you can actually freely spend your desired amount of resources for each construction. Using up different amounts will result in different gun types, but the game has conveniently given you recipes for each. When the construction starts, a timer will indicate when it's finished. Each doll rarity ranges from 2 to 5 stars. If you see that the timer is really short, then it's likely you got a 2-star. All dolls in the game actually have their own construction timer. If you knew that, you can predict which dolls are likely to be constructed from each attempt. The most curious aspect about this is that shotguns cannot appear from this pool, and that's where heavy construction comes in. This ominous looking tab on the right will require a lot more resources per construction, with the advantage that there is a higher chance of dropping rare dolls. The only problem, higher doesn't mean guaranteed. If you spend 2 entire days worth of resources just to get spooked by a 3-star, that would be pretty salty. If you're crazy enough, you can even use advanced heavy construction for ludicrous amounts of resources and higher odds, but it's still not guaranteed. It's worth noting that not all dolls in the construction pool share the same drop rates, as some are more likely to be constructed than others.
Correct.
I still don't have a copy of UMP45, despite her being literally the only 4-star SMG in the pool that I'm missing. Don't ask me why I don't have a copy, I just don't. The only thing...
Why don't you have a copy? She's from the 7-day login for new players. That doesn't make any sense. And I know another commenter said this too. Yeah, it's like, I guess you may have an account that's back in 2018? I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Resembling a pity system of sorts is anchored construction. These are events that can occasionally happen or just given to new players as bonuses. You will select a doll from a small list, then your odds of constructing that doll increases for each failed attempt. Eventually, you'll get them and the banner expires. In my opinion, one easy way to retain new players, given very few are coming in, is to simply give out more anchored construction banners. There's so many dolls in the game that providing an easy way to get the one a player wants is going to be much appreciated. During my time playing, I didn't actually attempt to build a machine gun shotgun team until much later, as they require the most amount of resources per construction attempt. Since the majority of content within my scope can be cleared without these gun types, I could just allocate my precious resources elsewhere. Production rate up is a thing in this game, as I had the pleasure to experience one, where the odds of constructing a 4 to 5 star is increased. For whatever reason, the event was extremely time sensitive, only lasting for 2 days. Though it does cycles to equipment, heavy production, and fairies rate up too. Equipment works almost the same way. The rarity ranges from 2 to 5 stars, and the only realistic viable ones here are the golds. Equipment is separated into many variants, and certain gun types that can only equip their respective compatible ones. Each construction attempt also uses a contract, except the rates here are pretty ass. Given that non-golds are either placeholders or worthless, your chances of getting viable pieces are actually pretty low. Aside from a mission reward, I have never gotten a gold night vision goggles during my 2 months of playing.
That's actually pretty rare. Yeah, it's actually pretty rare that you wouldn't get gold night vision goggles. Like, the reason why I don't get one is because I don't aim for it. It's not necessary. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. I wonder if he uses the special IOP orders. He probably does. He's probably told about it, so I guess he was just that unlucky.
Worth mentioning that select dolls have their own exclusive equipment that only they can equip. These are typically given out in events and login rewards. If you missed it, there's a way to still get them that I'll go over later on. But it just feels kinda bad that a shiny doll you pulled can't unlock their full potential because of this. Equipment can be enhanced up to level 10 or calibrated to reroll the degree of the gear's quality. These take calibration tickets from the Defense Drill daily mission. Fairies also have their own production menu, and they also take a good chunk of resources. They also use combat reports for XP, and when promoting them to the next star tier, you have to use other fairies for fodder. No using enhancement cubes here. They can also be calibrated to change the passive they provide. Coalition units take their own combat reports and skill leveling currencies. Dismantling one gives another currency to be exchanged in the shop. HOCs can also be leveled and promoted. These take a different chip currency. While the max promotion level is 5 stars, you can still put more stats onto them. You can unlock chips where it boosts a specific range of stats as well. They also have skills that require time to be leveled. Dolls also have affection. It goes up when they participate and win missions, but can actually go down if they're repeatedly damaged.
Let's change that. It's not repeatedly damaged. That's a very specific thing to get right. It's not when they get damaged, it's when they die. That's very, very specific.
Affection reaches 100, then Oath becomes available. This is basically the fabled feature that most gacha players want. With the Oath ring, you get a unique voice cutscene where you marry that doll. There will be a ring icon next to their name, and they get an XP boost when you give them combat reports. For whatever reason, you can Oath the evil
Oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. I know what he went for.
With fairy baddies too. Now that's based. I think the reason this feature doesn't get implemented more often today is due to the implication it can give off. You can actually Oath units introduced through collabs. Yes, this takes cucking to a whole nother level. Imagine if Azur Lane collabed with GFL and you rizz up the ship girls. Now that'd be a debacle worse than the Raymond incident.
You mentioned that.
You can Oath the machines?
Yes.
Should a doll reach max level, Neural Upgrade unlocks. Using the Neural Shard currency, you can raise the level cap and give them passive abilities. This can be done up to 3 times, with the final max level cap being 120. This process is often referred to as modding. Dolls are upgraded to the next rarity tier, and they get an additional skill. Some of them even change sprites, and these even have live 2D animation.
It's not some of them, it's all of them. Every mod 3 will change their sprite. So, just clarifying that.
That being said, neural upgrades tend to be very expensive. They are actually not available for all dolls, and only the most important character mod 3s have live 2D. Taking a detour into the base, you can go to the base camp, which is sort of like a different type of dispatch mission. You can bring pets along, and they're adopted in the rescue center, though I never really got into it. Most of the upgrades in the base take a battery.
And with that specific, you really don't need to get into the pets thing. It's like the last thing you do in your base. It is really superfluous, and honestly, it costs so many batteries that you can use them for any other thing that's way more important.
And they're usually obtained in the dorm. As per usual with most dorm features, you can decorate it and have your dolls inhabit it. Each dorm has a comfort level that's increased by placing furniture. The higher the comfort level, the faster the passive generation of batteries. Now, here's one of the most outdated and frustrating progression techniques.
Ooh, this is going to be interesting. I see him pull up the shop. Yeah, this one's going to be good.
When you start out, you only have a very limited number of echelons, not to mention only 2 construction slots. You can increase it by purchasing more in the Gems shop. Now, Gems is the premium currency in the game. You can kind of think of it as Primo Gems from Genshin. While you can convert it to tokens, which is what you'll use to pull on the gacha, they can also be used to buy permanent account upgrades like additional echelon spots, and even expand your inventory space. I don't know why it was designed this way, but the free-to-play income for gems is very slow. The shopkeeper Kalina even comments and nudges you to spend gems in the shop, and purchasing something even increases her affection level. She even has costumes for whatever reason. Since these infrastructure upgrades...
Because she's hot! What do you mean for whatever reason? It's because she's hot!
...can make your account more flexible and efficient, I really hope no gacha game does this today. So let's talk about a topic that's much more exciting.
Okay, so he is correct. That is how it works. Um, you get 2 production slots for producing T-dolls and 2 production slots for equipment and fairies. Now, for me personally, I did not buy any of those. That's like completely worthless to me. Now, for echelons, that's actually the most important thing, because you start out with 4, and 4 is not enough. Like, it's just straight up not enough. You can make it work, but you feel extremely constricted because you will always need at least 1 slot to do missions on, which means you only have 3 slots for logistics, and the max you can do for logistics is 4. So you at the very least want 6, because you will need 2 teams to complete missions. You cannot have one team and complete all missions in the game. That's just impossible. You will need 2 teams at some point. So if you want to constantly run logistics, you want 6 echelons at minimum. And then there's the dorm system where you start with I believe it's 4, or is it? It might have been 1, just 1 maybe. But you have 12 rooms, and for each room that you have, you get more batteries. So you also want more dorms as well. So the most important thing is echelons and dorms. Those are the most important ones. Now, I understand his point, and I agree with it. The fact that you have to choose what permanent upgrades that you want, and then fall into a pitfall because you made the wrong choice, that's really shitty, and that's really bad game design, and feels pretty anti-consumer, to be honest. So I do hope that no other game does it as well, but I want to clarify that since he focused so hard on production slots, which they don't really matter, I just wanted to clarify that.
For a reason. Since these infrastructure upgrades can make your account more flexible and efficient, I really hope no gacha game does this today. So let's talk about a topic that's much more exciting. Given that I've mentioned gacha, guess what's coming up next? GFL's gacha system is strange to wrap your head around. Since you get dolls through construction, the gacha is actually only for skins and furniture. Some old school gachas did this back in the day after all. Now you might think, if you only pull for cosmetics and all gameplay elements can be done for free, doesn't that actually mean that GFL is one of the most free-to-play gacha games out there? Well, it's complicated. While that may be true, I think there's a reason why the game virtually makes no revenue in the modern gacha era. After my analysis, maybe you understand why. First, let's learn how the gacha system works. Using the premium currency tokens for 10 units a pull, or 100 for 11 pulls, you can get either a skin, which can be either a static sprite or live 2D, alternatively, a piece of furniture, its rarity ranging from 3 to 5 stars. I probably don't need to say this, but the live 2D skins are the ones that are the most desirable. Furniture, on the other hand, can be used to decorate your dorms. You start with 2, and that number can be expanded with gems.
Okay, that's
Each
2.
dorm starts out with the most basic of furnishing, so just to ease your minds, just so that your dolls aren't living in poverty, you might as well replace all the cardboard chairs and beds with actual furnishing. If you roll the gacha, naturally, furniture is much more common than costumes. As stated before, placing them will increase the comfort level of the dorm, which increases the rate of passive generation of the battery currency. This means technically, the gacha system does still affect gameplay, albeit indirectly. You can see the possible drops for each item on the banner, except there's no individual rate-up chance listed anywhere. GFL first released...
This is correct. I looked for it myself as well, and I also looked up for any data online, and it's just not there. No one really knows.
In 2016, and back then, developers didn't have to list the rates for their gacha games yet. In China, at least. It's just that old school. So after combing the net, I found some convincing sources that list the rates. According to an official post in 2017, the drop rates are as follows: 2% for a skin, 8% for a 5-star furniture, 36% for a 4-star furniture, and the remaining 54% for the 3 stars.
So I've never seen this. As a person who has engaged in the gacha a little bit, the main issue isn't really the rates, it's about how much currency you get, which is very small. I'm pretty sure he's going to get into the currency of tokens, which is really bad.
This is a good start, but it still doesn't tell me the individual rates for the skins, as there's typically more than one featured per banner, which, let's be honest, is what all players are here for. Here's the problem. These rates aren't actually listed anywhere in an official capacity, but when you get a dataset large enough, you can make some pretty good guesses. In a blog post analyzing this, a user has conducted a survey that tracked the rates in which users got the skins. Since that there's usually more than one skin on rate up per banner, you might think that the chance is split equally among the 2%. But the finding of this blog post may surprise you. After 24,000 polls, the survey concludes that only 24 out of 12,900 polls gave a live 2D skin, suggesting that when accounting for marginal errors, we can confidently say that the rate up chance for a live 2D skin is below 0.4%. These are obviously some sus rates, but what if you could just exchange it through a pity system? Well, every time you pull on a banner, you get an exchange token. Accumulate enough of those, and you can exchange it for a skin. But not so fast. Some skins require more tickets than others, while the static ones can range in the 100 to 200 mark. The live 2D ones, oh, just a measly 600.
Yeah.
No matter how generous the game is, 600 polls for one skin is a tall order. Just a note, exchange tickets don't carry over across banners and will expire after the banner does. They do give a small portion of it back as tokens, but at a very middling rate. The free token income as a free-to-play is fairly low, so if you wanted to save up for a skin you've always wanted, you'll be stockpiling it for a while. What I'm trying to say is,
For a while is like 6 months, by the way.
telling someone to save up 1 year to get one skin is not a convincing argument these days to entice new players. You can see how this model doesn't translate well into today's day and age. After all, it's fairly common for most gacha games to have live 2D sprites pre-attached, so why bother going through all this ruckus for it when you can just get it for free? I believe this is one of the reasons why this model for a gacha game just isn't very appealing anymore. Live 2D is not this forbidden technology that people hold in high regards. It's become a basic expectation of new gacha releases that not having it would feel a little out of place. Exilium and Neural Cloud managed to swing it around by sticking to the traditional methods of rolling actual characters. All you have to do is take a look at how gacha games are monetized today to see how this model clearly isn't working out anymore. The second reason this model is outdated is as follows. As a matter of fact, I actually got a few skins, but there's just one problem. You have to gift the skin to the respective doll for it to take effect. And as it stands, I don't have any but one of them, so these bricked skins are just sitting in my inventory. I literally can't use the items I pulled from the gacha. The thing about implementing skins in gacha games is that you have to own the character first. If not, then the skin is effectively useless. Considering that some dolls are limited or dropped from grinding a level, then you might as well not pull until you have some of the dolls on the banner. It's like they're giving players a reason not to spend money on the game. One nice side bonus at least is that the gacha doesn't have any duplicate system. You cannot limit break a costume. If you land a dupe of one you already have, you get something called a black card. This can be used in an exchange shop for most of the skins that were run in the past. The issue is that, again, the gacha economy for free-to-play tends to be very tight, so it's unlikely you'll take advantage of this unless you spend money or have been playing for a while. So what can you buy with real-life money? Well, the most obvious is the gems currency. You can also exchange gems for tokens, with a 10-pull exchange being more cost-efficient. While you can directly buy resources or construction contracts with gems, even by 2016 standards, most players know that this is just whale bait. If you were a new player, your gems are better spent on permanent upgrades first, such as more echelon or production slots, unless you really want to dip into the gacha. When it comes to monetization, you'll see the standard stuff of your monthly supplies and battle passes. Yes, I did spend money on this game. I bought a round of the monthly, as the free gems economy is really bad.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw it with the battle pass skins.
You can customize your avatar with items sold in the shop. Now I'm gonna be honest here, this feels pretty stupid, since all the ways you can dress up the commander costs gems. This means the majority of players, especially free-to-plays and beginners, will just be running around in the default commander avatars indefinitely. You can actually buy doll costumes with gems or cash directly, but as stated before, if you don't own that doll, you can't use these costumes at all. There's also the Premium Battle Pass for $10. You get quite a number of goodies here, including a skin, and I mostly don't have a problem with Premium Battle Passes giving players accelerated progression. I gotta make these videos after all. You also get a random 5-star doll from a list, prioritizing one that you don't already have. But this is premium track only. This battle pass is also the only one I've seen in a game where the free tracks just has some empty levels. My guess is that it's like that to make the premium track look better in comparison, but still, even a little bit of free stuff couldn't hurt. GFL has a lot of mobile game tropes, and while you can make a decent argument that the game is very free to play, all you have to do is to take a look on how Mika Team's other games are monetized to know what model the industry is going in.
So, the big thing that he liked to say is that, yes, you need the dolls in order to use the skins, but the main reason why I don't pull on it is because there are a lot of dolls that I have that are just not being used. Like I said, I only have 2 teams that I use on maps, and those 2 teams curb stomp the entire game, more or less. If I'm not using any of those other dolls, then why would I pull on a gacha system that is so predatory? There's just no point in doing that.
As you might imagine, GFL has gone through many changes to its systems and UI over the years. I overall didn't have any trouble navigating through all the menus. Though there were some jank I had to deal with, it's still fairly decently kept up over its runtime. There's a lot of quality of life that I like, considering the game's so old, such as quick dispatch, restarting a battle immediately, or sweeping the daily missions. That's just nice. Now, on the other hand, some of the design choices are so outdated that it's not really possible to fix them anymore. Like how punishing the game is when it comes to using up your resources, or how front echelons have a cooldown even if you don't complete the mission. Having gems as upgrade currencies is also kinda stupid, since you have to deal with the game telling you to go disassemble dolls or increase your inventory size very frequently. This shouldn't be a problem in most games, and it's just a byproduct of old school design. Not being able to use your echelons while they're occupied also kinda annoy me. And equipment slots do have presets, except I found it a nightmare to deal with. This gets pretty apparent when you have to switch the equipment and teams around for day and night battles. Still, I'd say it's at least made some attempts to update it to a somewhat modern level. The story is presented with static sprites, and the gameplay portions have the dolls represented in chibi form. It's very old school, but it also means that this game won't burn through my phone battery in 10 minutes. Unfortunately, no voice acting. Not the biggest deal, considering the team's scale when it first began, though if some of the scenes had it, the story would have had more punch. I would compare it to the feeling when I was playing FGO. You got this extremely expressive narrative with all the characters, with how they sound conjured up in my mind, and when I actually got to play some of them in-game, it just felt weird to hear what they actually sounded like. There's a quick toggle menu that lets you navigate to all the modes from a single screen, something more akin to a modern game. Some of the quality of life is not consistent. Certain leveling menus give a way to manually type in an amount of combat reports to give, except certain other leveling menus can't do that for some reason. The base camp shop
He could just hit the minus sign as well and it lets you use the maximum amount. Just want to throw that out there.
sells upgrade items in limited quantities per month, except you can't one-click max out to buy everything you can afford. You have to manually select the quantity, except I don't see a reason why a player will want to select an amount that they can't afford. Since it's quite punishing to manage your resources, something I would like to see is an undo move button while in a level, but the planning mode kinda already compensates for it. That would have been a nice touch. Auto battling is a thing in case you want to farm for a specific drop. It unlocks after you beat a level once, but it still uses up resources, and unless you really want to grind a drop, there's very few cases that auto battling is actually good value.
And those resources that it uses is way too high. Like, it's way, way too high. I don't think there's any reason for anyone to use auto battle at all, because the resources it uses it's ludicrously high, to the point where you just might as well not have it at all. Not even for your dailies. It's just not good.
Instantly completing base upgrades require gems too. That's how you know how old school it is. Most games with this mechanic don't let you pay instantly to complete it all, since it just feels like a classic mobile game gimmick, and most high-quality gacha games are past that. So you can see there's a lot of ways the game has tried to modernize itself, but the 2010s design choices will still peek its head through once in a while. It's something that's a bit more difficult to describe all at once, but you will notice some of the jank if you start playing today. They try to do some pretty clever level ideas further along the campaigns. I found them to be neat little gimmicks, though I really wouldn't say they're that technologically impressive given today's standards. I don't judge music in my reviews, as not everyone is into EDM, but the main composer for the game is Halloween, the technical director of Vanguard Sound. Coincidentally, he also composed the soundtrack for Punishing Grey Raven. Funny how you can find these connections in the most random of places. In case you're wondering, Vanguard Sound is composing for Exilium 2. I actually enjoy listening to these arcadey tracks since they sound more like video game music. Overall, the presentation is fine, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that everything's perfect. Some of the jank I suspect will be in the game for as long as it's live, since it's either not possible to fix it or there's just no point given how small the audience this game still has. So you got a few echelons of built-up dolls. Where can you use them? Well, this is where old school designs can differ from newer approaches. Much of the harder content is built directly into the events and stories themselves. While this is something that I personally find a little questionable, as I think story and challenge content should be separated, it's something that I did have to go through. I did enjoy some of the challenges these levels brought, and there were cases where the level has a special gimmick that you have to either study it extensively or just look up a guide. If you go into it blind, it may take you a few tries, which normally wouldn't be an issue, but again, consider that used resources are not refunded to you if you restart. Games like Reverse 1999 just lets you put the story on a breezy mode with fewer rewards if you're just there for the plot. They kinda learn from this, as the later event campaigns have its dedicated hard mode. So while you're likely going to be tested more than your usual gacha games, it's not too bad, I would say. Okay, but what about non-events? Are there any other late game modes? Well, the main one I see is Gray Zone Exploration. For each season, you basically assemble an echelon and have them explore a map. Each node contains an enemy encounter, and the map will cycle day and night time after a couple turns. The levels themselves have increasing difficulty, but there's no special gimmick for what I've seen. This is a far cry from story stages, as they feel more curated and interconnected with the plot, whereas here you just go through a bunch of copy-pasted levels over and over. While there is a proxy battle mode that puts the game on auto, you have to manually select the echelons you want the game to pick from, and you have to manually adjust them for the night battles when they happen. Not only that, you can't take over and do some strategic plays, so if the AI decides to have a mind of its own and doing something that you don't want, you have to halt it entirely and start it back up later. I'd be lying if I said I enjoy this mode. Each session just takes a super long time, and while I appreciated some challenge content once in a while, I think there's a fine line between difficult and tedious.
So, I guess you can say Gray Zone Exploration is a in-game mode. You can probably call it that. I think the main issue with Girls Frontline 1 is that there really isn't in-game at all, to be honest. Gray Zone Exploration is just the closest we have to it. Now, as far as him saying you had to manually swap out for day and night cycles, that's not necessarily true. It is true in a sense, but not entirely. The pain point here is that if you want to use the same team for night battles, you have to change their equipment. But you can configure the game so that if there is a night battle, you can use a different echelon. So there is that at least. But if you want to use the same team, yes, it is a big pain point.
With the points you gather from exploring, you can reach reward milestones for each season. The main attraction here is the selector in which you get to pick an exclusive equipment for a doll, in case you missed it in the past. Not all of them are added here, but most of them are. You'd think that the game would have other endgame modes after being alive for so many years. Except other than Gray Zone, the only other mode that has some degree of competition is the ranking map in events. These are only active when an event is, and it's basically a map where you can score points and rank yourself to other commanders. I can't show this since there was literally none when I played. Events are also pretty infrequent. Aside from costume banners or construction rate ups, there's actually not much else that deviates from the main modes. This is not ideal considering that most live service games will constantly have some kind of event happening. I'm sure some can make the argument that it means it's fairly easy to keep up, but when it comes to player retention, this will hurt the overall numbers of the player base.
Entirely, yes, he is entirely right. So here is my experience with Ghost Frontline as a person who started taking the game seriously in 2024. I got to the point where I had 2 teams that can wreck the entire game. I now have nothing to do. So more or less what's going on with me is that I can basically log on, do logistics, and then log off. I can literally do that and I'll be totally fine for the next event. Because that's basically what I did for this most recent event. I started playing other gacha games again, and I had basically 2 weeks where I did just that, and I was still totally fine. I thought it would be hard because, you know, I didn't have like any niche moves or anything like that, but the Scar team is just silly in all sorts of ways. They take care of everything, and if I want to have some fun, I guess I could just use M4 Exodia, which is just as strong as a Scar team, but you need to use more micro. There are issues with the end game modes in this game, and the fact that there isn't any. The biggest problem that Ghost Frontline 1 has with these events is that they're not constant. There's usually like a month cooldown where there's basically nothing going on in game, and that does absolutely hurt player retention, especially because the only ones who are playing now are really dedicated players. I know there are people who are interested in Ghost Frontline 1 because of Ghost Frontline 2 now, but just based off of this review, I've seen this same sentiment across a lot of people, where they say, no, the game is just way too complicated and I don't like it in general. So that's his main turnoff for most people. So yes, player retention is a huge problem for this game.
There are 2 types of events in the game: smaller ones that are more lighthearted stories that usually don't get rerun often, and major ones that greatly expand on the main plot. These are very long and very well thought out. Basically, while the main story extends up to Chapter 13, these major events will be added permanently to the archive and serve as interludes that happen between each chapter. To be honest, they've completely abandoned the original format and just have all new story progression happen during these events. Now, worth mentioning that the storyline for GFL has actually concluded on the CN servers. On global, there's 3 more episodes to go as of the release of this video. After that, the game will enter Legacy version, and all new story content will just be done through Exilium. I managed to play a bit of Zero Charge, Chapter 15.5, and a continuation of the previous campaign. Obviously, most of the narrative felt foreign since I haven't played the parts leading up to it, and I didn't even have a built-up team at this point, so I only saw a few glimpses of it. Even so, I was impressed by the writing and cultural understanding of the setting it depicted. There's a general sentiment that the writing started to hit its peak after the Singularity arc, and I feel there's such a difference in tone between this and Exilium that they almost feel like completely different entities.
This is a very good point, and I absolutely agree with this. I know a lot of people agree with this as well. Like there is a drastically different tone between Ghost Frontline 1 and 2 right now, and a lot of the veterans of Ghost Frontline 1 are waiting for that tone to come back in Ghost Frontline 2. But I don't think it's going to come back because it's not even having like a more lighthearted story for Ghost Frontline 2. It's really bleak in Ghost Frontline 1. It's really, really bleak. Like, it's even more bleak than Nikkei's in some cases. Yeah, he is definitely right about that.
If Exilium is able to achieve the same level of writing, then I will be sure to return to it. These major events are easily the highlights for any ongoing players. They run for a month, and the storyline is actually very long. It would likely take you at least a couple days to finish, assuming you play regularly. That being said, these events also are not time-gated. You can go through to the end as soon as they're available. Part of the reason I had to give up on the Zero Charge campaign is that I realized I didn't even have an echelon that was capable of dealing with a type of enemy yet. Once again, these curated stories have level designs interwoven to the plot, and feel different each time. My only complaint is that it's not added to the archive immediately. GFL is in sort of a unique position here. Since it has an endpoint at which the story concludes, this means they're able to write stories in a way that's not restricted by the live service nature of mobile games. They're able to start killing off some key characters, and the main cast is able to develop and change. They can do some things that really makes it feel like the overall plot is reaching its climax, instead of keeping it going to drag out the runtime of the game. I think there's always something surreal about a live service game reaching the end of its storyline. The characters went through everything and the world built up to that point has to come to a close, despite the expectation that these games are to be going indefinitely. So, we reached the end of the road. Playing through Girls Frontline has made me experience some of the highest of highs and also some lows. Mechanically, there's a lot of hiding under the hood, despite looking like a casual auto-battler mobile game. Old school gachas still have their charms, especially when you finally figure out how to actually play them. Granted, it doesn't feel like a forever game, at least not by today's standards. From its unforgiving resource management, outdated UI and monetization, coupled with infrequent event cycles, GFL just doesn't attract too many new players anymore. Luckily, the franchise is not ending. Far from it, actually. Once Global runs through the remaining 3 events, then it will likely shut down and continue on in the legacy version, same way the CN server is doing right now. This version will bring the game to PC. Whether it turns into a single-player game is anyone's guess.
It's also anyone's guess if we get the PC version in the first place. He's going in with full confidence that the global servers will shut down after the end of the storyline. That is not set in stone, because they didn't even want to shut down the CN server at all. They were only forced to because the Dark server or Dark Winter wouldn't want to redo the contract, so they had issues there. But Global is on an entirely different contract, so that may not be the case. It may still stay up. And even if it does go down, we don't even know if we'll get the PC version. Granted, he did say likely, but he was very confident about it. I just want to make sure that people understand that this is not set in stone.
That being said, since Exilium takes place after the events of the first game, the story has to end one way or another. Would I recommend getting into the GFL universe? My answer is an absolute yes. Do I recommend starting this game? That's a lot more difficult to answer. There's a lot of jank and unnecessarily punishing mechanics that makes it tough to approach if you come in with the expectations of modern gacha games. I've made a fair share of mistakes during my time playing, and there were times I just really wanted to call it quits. That being said, I was surprised by its fresh perspective on world building, level designs that actually tie itself to the story, and writing that genuinely surprised me how good it is when it gets to the highlights. It's super weird that among all the gacha games that are perceived to have a good narrative, one of the best is just hidden away, out of view by most players today. GFL is that one grandparent that some visit once in a while. It's that forgotten relic that few people have played, but almost everyone in the gacha community have at least heard about. Through all of its imperfections, it has made me care about its characters and universe very few have done before, and I'll certainly be paying close attention to how the story develops. Thank you for joining me today for the ride. If you enjoy more gacha-related content like this, or would like to suggest the next game to review, you know what to do. And as always, have fun out there.
There are some things he didn't touch on, like he didn't touch on how deep the gameplay actually is with microwaving and stuff like that. He probably just didn't have time to go into it. Obviously, he only got to chapter 12, he said. He didn't actually get to 13. And there is definitely some jank that he didn't get into either, like how you have to manipulate the AI, and how you have to complete some maps where you literally don't know how it works until you spend like a bunch of resources doing trial and error. Like, there is a lot of issues with Girls Frontline 1, but the reason why it is one of my favorite gacha games is because it's so unique, and also the story is peak, in my opinion. It's up there with Nikkei, but I really wouldn't want this game to go away just because of how unique it is. We will never have another gacha game like Girls Frontline 1. Never. Like, it'll never happen again. Even with the resource management, people call this like the Dark Souls of gacha games, because even though you don't spend money on the game, you are so heavily pressured to do well in just about every single aspect of the game because of resources. Everything, literally everything, is tied to a resource. And if you squander it, then it hurts you really badly. And this is both a blessing and a curse. Because I know when I was first playing the game seriously, I was going through episode 7.5. I'm pretty sure that's Arctic Warfare. And I was dealing with the Jupiter cannons, and I really didn't want to deal with the bullshit level design because they did kind of horribly. They did pretty horrible things with the level design on that one. So I was just forcing my way through the Jupiter cannons that basically one-shot your characters, and I'll just repair them. Like, yeah, it's fine. I got plenty of resources. And then it turns out maybe 5 hours later, I was at 2,000 manpower, and I basically couldn't play the game anymore. So there is a lot of jank and a lot of issues and a lot of pitfalls. One thing I wanted him to mention was just how many pitfalls there were in this game. He did touch on it briefly, where saying the game is heavily punishing, and that you couldn't really experiment with the game. But I think the worst part about it is that you can't trial and error with this game because of all the pitfalls that it have. I think that may be the single most determining factor for people sticking with this game. No one really wants to be punished for trying to learn something in a game. That's just one of those things where we just don't have anything to curb that. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. I still love this game. It's still one of my favorites, and I'll keep playing it until the story ends. And then we'll see what happens after the case. Maybe we'll get the PC version, maybe we won't. But either way, I know Ghost Frontline is timeless to me, both in story and in gameplay, and we'll never have anything like it ever again. So that's all for me. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see y'all next time.